morning, everyone. My name is Jean Shoemaker, and the study that I will be presenting today is titled Why Me? A Look at Schoolyard and Cyberbullying. So I want you all to think of a young person in your life. This might be a son or a daughter, a sibling, or maybe a niece or nephew. Imagine that they are passionate and excited to go to school every day. But then one day they start to make excuses as to not go to school the next day and the next day. You ask them why, but they simply don't open up to you because they feel, how could you understand? Well, this is exactly what happened to a young girl named Rebecca Sedgwick. She was being bullied at school, being called mean names, taunted, teased. She even got into a physical fight once. She was also bullied on her cell phone and online through Instagram. Her mother tried to intervene and monitor her social media use, but there's only so much you can do. She even had her change schools, and things started to get a little bit better, but then the cyberbullying began to happen again. One morning, Rebecca woke up, got dressed for school, but instead of walking to the school bus, she walked to a cement plant near her house, and she climbed up one of the towers, and she jumped off. She was only 12 years old. Bullying happens at almost every school. Yes, some more than others, but the facts is that 1 in 4 students in the United States are bullied on a regular basis. Only 1 in 10 of these students will actually report being bullied to a student, a teacher, or a parent. 1 in 10 students has had inappropriate or damaging photos posted of them on the internet without their consent, usually using pictures from camera phones. A study done by Blake, Kim, McCormick, and Hayes studied 3 types of bullying: overt bullying, which is physical altercations or threats of fighting; social bullying, which is verbal attacks; and peer exclusion, leaving someone out on purpose. Results showed no difference between genders when it came to the verbal and nonverbal forms of bullying. Boys showed higher levels in overt bullying, and girls showed higher levels in peer exclusion. So this study shows trends of bullying on the school setting, but what about cyberbullying? A similar study conducted by Raskowskis and Stoltz in 2007 examined the comparison between traditional, which is schoolyard bullying, and electronic bullying, also known as cyberbullying. Their hypothesis was if a student is engaging in electronic bullying, or traditional bullying, they were also an electronic bully. And the same would go for victims. Results supported this. If a child was a bully at school, they were probably a bully online as well. An interesting correlation was found between being a bully online and a victim at school, perhaps because of the anonymity that online bullying provides. Reading these studies, and among a few others, led me to my research question. Does being bullied affect the personal lives of students? The present study examined 2 hypotheses. Hypothesis number 1 is meant to check up on the previous trends and see if they are supported in the Palos Verdes area. These trends are that girls will engage in cyberbullying more than boys, and boys will engage in physical bullying or overt bullying more than girls. And hypothesis number 2 is that with higher levels of bullying, victims will suffer from higher levels of symptoms of depression and anxiety, which can be characterized by a loss of sleep, negative attitude, and a low self-esteem. So why should you care? Well, we as a society need to step up and realize how important this issue is before it becomes too late, because 160,000 students stay home from school every day because they're scared of being bullied. Victims are 8 times more likely to commit suicide. Suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death in young people today. And what's even more alarming is that for every 1 suicide, there are 100 attempts. As you can see, this is the racial breakdown of my participants. They were middle school students aged 11 to 14. They were surveyed. There were 3 schools surveyed: Palos Verdes Intermediate School, Ridgecrest Intermediate, and Mira Leste Intermediate. Most of the students were either white, Asian, or Pacific Islander. The materials used for this survey, or for this study, were the surveys, consent forms, and debriefing script. So in order to conduct the study, I was using minors, so I needed to get the permission of their schools to be on the campus and the permission from their parents to survey their children. So I set up meetings with the principal or safe school counselor at each school, and I presented them with my research proposal, and upon their approval, I went to 2 classes at each school. I gave a brief introduction of myself and the study, and I handed out consent forms. The students were to sign them and the parents as well. 2 to 3 days later, I came back to conduct the survey. Only students who turned in their consent forms were allowed to participate in the survey. And they were encouraged to be open and honest with their answers, and if they had any questions along the way, they could ask me. The same debriefing script was read to each group of students upon completing the survey, and this was just to notify them of what the study was looking for, and if they needed to get in contact with me, if they had any further questions, or if they wanted to withdraw from participation. And students were not compensated for their participation. So here are a few examples of the questions that were asked on the survey. In order to identify victims, I asked, have you been bullied in the last year? And they would answer yes or no. In order to identify the bullies, I asked them to have the students compare themselves to certain situations, such as some kids hit, push, or shove other kids at school. They would circle a lot like me, kind of like me, a little like me, or not at all like me. And in order to identify the victims who have symptoms of depression or anxiety, this, along with a few other situations, were posed. Being bullied affects my attitude negatively. Strongly agree, agree, it doesn't bother me, disagree, or strongly disagree. So I needed to know what types of electronics and internet usage these children had access to. 87% had an email account. 61% had some sort of social media account, whether that was Facebook, Instagram, or Tumblr. 77% had texting on their cell phones, and 66% had picture messaging on their cell phones. So in the first page of the survey, the students were asked if they had thought they had been bullied in the last year. 68.5% of these students answered no, while 31% answered yes. If they did not think that they were bullied in the last year, they were instructed not to complete the last section of the survey. The last section of the survey was meant to identify the symptoms of depression and anxiety. Of the 55 participants, 24 of them completed this section. 66% of these students had said that being bullied affected their sleeping negatively. 58% reported that being bullied had a negative effect on their attitude. And 54% held that being bullied made them feel bad about themselves. This study also aimed to find the bullies. There was an unexpected trend in overt bullying, which again is physical bullying, that showed up in females over males. 5 girls compared to 3 boys admitted to hitting, pushing, or shoving a fellow classmate in the last month. There was also an expected trend between girls and boys, with 6 girls compared to 2 boys having admitted to sending mean text messages to a classmate. Mean text messages aligns with cyberbullying. An interesting supplementary finding was that when students were asked if they had been bullied in the last year, they answered no, but they still reported examples of being bullied. Of the students who answered no, 8 of them had been hit, pushed, or shoved 1 to 4 times in the last month. 12 students reported being teased or called mean names 1 to 4 times in the last month. 11 students were excluded, and the same number had rumors spread about them 1 to 4 times in the past month. So a summary of my statistics. Hypothesis number 1 was not strongly supported. While girls did show evidence of cyberbullying over boys, which aligns with past research, they also showed higher levels in overt bullying over boys. And hypothesis number 2, of the participants who completed the last section of the survey, significant numbers were found that being bullied affected them negatively, which supports the hypothesis. One of my main limitations was sample size. I handed out about 150 consent forms and only 55 were returned to me. And it didn't seem that the parents didn't want their children to participate, but there was kind of a forgetfulness going on. They're young middle school kids, what may not be as important to them since they're not getting extra credit or anything for participating. And they weren't compensated, so that I would suggest that maybe a extra credit point or some candy, bring a bag of candy, and you guys can get some candy if you bring back your consent form. That would have worked for me when I was 12, so. And also another limitation was the type of class. At Ridgecrest and Muralest, I visited elective classes. So these students are less likely to bring their books back, or bring their books to that class, so they don't really need them because it's an art class or a computer class. So that was probably why they forgot their consent forms, because a lot of them would come back on the day that I was there, they'd recognize me and be like, oh, I forgot my consent form, because some of them were really actually interested in participating. But at PVIS, however, that was where I got most of my return consent forms, and that was 2 8th grade social studies classes. So they're a little bit older, maybe a little bit more mature than the other participants, and social studies is a core class, so they're more likely to bring their books. So my implications, the implications are to improve or establish more anti-bullying programs in schools. A clear definition needs to be made of what bullying is, and students need to be encouraged and feel comfortable reporting bullying if they see it going on. So what I would like for you to take from this presentation is that it is up to everybody to stop bullying or prevent bullying, and parents need to instill a sense of confidence in their children. Bullies need to be taught that what they're doing is really damaging to other people. And teachers and administrators need to be held accountable for making the school setting a safe and welcoming environment. And peers need to be taught not to be afraid if they see bullying going on and intervene, because the bully is actually more likely to listen to a fellow student rather than a parent or a teacher. And it's true, with one act of kindness, it can truly save a life. Thank you.
Is media taking a toll on your love life? Obtaining a perfect relationship establishes happiness. A long-term relationship establishes long-term social bonds. However, finding a suitable suitor may not come as easy to people as we may hope. Therefore, we go through the endless cycle of finding a mate, dating, and nurturing that relationship. Therefore, it would seem that finding a perfect soulmate may seem like an impossible and daunting task. I'd like to start with what inspired my presentation. I had a conversation over the phone with my mother about relationships, and we're trying to figure out what specifically influences men on preventing them to want to commit. So we came up with some social factors, some social pressures that can have influence them, such as family, friends, and past relationships. Our concluding idea was media. Now we know that media influences our behavior, but is there a correlation of affecting commitment levels? This inspired my research question. How does media influence our behavior and willingness to commit? In a past research, a Hawk study explored the topic of sexual media content. He wanted to see if adolescents that viewed many graphic media material would be more permissive in their sexual practices. He surveyed the students whether they're absent or not, but the results found that it was very significant that adolescents that viewed sexual media were influenced to have more permissive lifestyles. Another study by Lambert wanted to examine whether consumption of pornography affects romantic relationships. 34 participants were examined. Participants were from the ages of 18 to 20, and they were asked how many times in the past 30 days that they viewed pornographic material. Following the presentation, they asked if they were videotaped with their romantic partner, and they were asked to complete a task while trusting them. The task that they had to do was they were blindfolded, and they had to make an artistic drawing. The results found that the pornography does have a negative effect with trust within relationships among their romantic partners. This led to my studies. Studies have shown that viewing sexual media is correlated to the increased sexual activity in viewers. However, further studies show that sexual media affects trust within relationships. However, there is no research that says that media affects commitment levels. This current study seeks to explore whether commitment affects relationships. The expectation of the study is that media does influence people's perceptions to commit. Although there is no literature anecdotally, it seems that men will be less willing to commit in relationships than women. Therefore, it creates my second hypothesis. I hypothesize that males will be influenced more with media and are willing to commit than females. I surveyed 50 Marymount California University students through the ages of 18 and 25. When asked if they were currently interested in a relationship, 64% described themselves, 58% described themselves as single, 36% described themselves as being in a monogamous relationship, and 6% described themselves as dating more than one person at a time. When asked the gender, 36% were identified themselves as males, and 64% identified themselves as females. Once given consent forms, participants answered a series of demographic questions, such as their gender, their current relationship status, how much media they consumed, and what types of media they consumed. Following, they were asked to view 5 different types of media clips, while then answering 2 questions that correspond with it. Once the experiment was concluded, participants were debriefed. This is an example of one of my still shots of my experiments. You may take the time and just read what was above. In this particular film, I chose the 2008 video sequence Married Life in the movie Up. In this video, it entails a perfect ideal marriage life, from meeting your ideal love at a young age to losing them within old age. The next media clip that I showed was a portion out of 50 Shades of Grey. In this particular chapter of the story, it was a mother-daughter conversation that talked about ideal love and basically entailing that you have to kiss multiple guys in a relationship before you actually find your true Prince Charming or the ideal person you eventually will end up with. Questions were analyzed using a 4-point scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree. The procedure. Participants were given consent forms. Then I basically have them answer the demographic questions, and then they had them they viewed the 5 media clips, and then they were debriefed. The results. When looking at gender and the question, I'll be willing to engage in multiple relationships at one time, 89% of males agreed that wanting to engage in multiple relationships. However, 60% of women also agree to wanting to engage in multiple relationships at one time. This is significant because it does show in our Marymount California University community that both genders are equally wanting to engage and not want to just commit to one person at one time, which does show in our current college life that we may not be necessarily ready to be tied down to one person yet. When examining gender and the question, I think relationships are more physical than emotional, 61% of males agree that relationships are more physical than emotional. Only 29% of females agree that relationships are more physical than emotional. This is significant because it does show that women are emotional creatures and that men do first have their first biases on first instinct off their biological nature of having to express their physical urges first. When examining media and the relationship between the amount of media consumed and willingness to commit a monogamous relationship, there is no significance found. In addition, there is no relationship between any of these variables and any of the tested of how much media was consumed. Therefore, the amount of media consumed does not influence perceptions on commitment. When looking into relationship status, no relationship between there is no relationship between relationship status and the willingness to commit in a monogamous relationship. In addition, there is no relationship between any of the variables tested and relationship status. Relationship status did not influence perceptions of committing in a monogamous relationship. There's a statistically significant difference between men and women's desires to want to engage in multiple relationships at one time, with men being higher than women. This supports my second hypothesis, that men will be influenced more in wanting to engage in multiple relationships than women would. There is also statistical significance with men and women's belief that love is more physical than emotional. However, in my first hypothesis, the expectation of this study is that media does not influence people's perceptions to commit was not supported. There is no significant correlation with media and perceptions of willingness to want to commit. Some limitations of my study was that my survey questions were not specific enough. I was very broad because I wanted to give my participants liberty to just answer freely. However, that limited me when it came down to analyzing my data because I had a lot of different viewpoints. Another limitation was my sample size. I only focused on Marymount California University students, which may seem like a great idea. However, college students do have different perceptions of committing, since it does share our hypothesis that they do want to engage in multiple relationships at one time and not be just tied down to one person just yet. Another limitation was my age ranges. 18 to 25 seemed like a good idea at the time, trying to explore relationship types. However, if I would have just targeted a little bit older beyond college, I might have seen a different correlation. Future research. Some future research that I would love to look into is specific types of media and how much of that specific media that they view and commitment levels. Another future research topic would be reality TV versus scripted TV and see how that relates with commitment levels. And going back to my mother. So why is it so hard for men to commit relationships? Could it be the other social pressures I talked about before, of family, friends, or even past relationship status? We don't know just yet, but we're gonna find out. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Roxanne Salone, and my topic was the influence of romantic comedies on women. So my research question, how did I come up with it? One day, me and my sister were bored one weekend, and we were trying to flip through the channels, trying to find something to watch. She stopped at Lifetime, and it was a chick flick that was on, and we started watching it. At the end of the movie, she commented, she was like, see, this is why girls can never find their Prince Charming, because they have all these ideas of how guys are supposed to be when they don't exist. And it got me thinking, like, is this true? Like, does the media really affect how we think? And it helps me come up with my research question. What effects do romantic comedies have on women? So what are romantic comedies? Romantic comedies are comedy films that show lovers trying to overcome problems they may have, whether it be social, psychological, or interpersonal, to be together. Some of the highest grossing romantic comedies of all time are My Big Fat Greek Wedding, What Women Want, Hitch, Pretty Woman, There's Something About Mary, and the film The Proposal. So what are romantic comedies about? In a content analysis of 52 romantic comedies, they found that at least one romantic ideal was expressed every 14 minutes. Some of these romantic ideals included soulmate and one and only, love conquers all, love at first sight, and overcoming any challenge that gets in the way just to be together. They also found that when a romantic ideal was shown, they there would be a positive consequence the majority of the time. So an example would be in the movie Sex and the City, when the male main character proclaimed his love for the woman, she rewarded him by hugging him, giving him kisses and smiles, and everybody saw him as a good guy, like it was a good thing. On the other hand, when a romantic ideal was challenged, there would be a consequence. So in the movie The Wedding Planner, when the male character broke up with the girl to be with someone else, he didn't do it in a mean way. He tried to explain it in a way that wasn't bad, but they saw him as a bad guy, and she was mad, she was angry, and the friends couldn't believe that's what happened. So why should we care? In a study done by Alice Hall about what types of medias would be utilized the most, she found that the most viewed were romantic comedies. The problem with this is that watching idealized and upbeat representation of love is that these films show practical and exaggerated ideas of what romance is to attract the woman's attention. This can be a problem for individuals who don't know the difference between, okay, this is the fantasy world, and they use this as their prototype. Some theories that I found were the social cognition theory, and it says that individuals will learn by watching how others behave, and they will use them as models to compare to their own behavior. They're more likely to model the behavior of the person they are comparing themselves as attractive, and if the person is being rewarded rather than punishment. This is also, they also said that now that with TV being like in every home and laptops having Netflix, you can watch this at school, you can watch this at the luxury of your own home, and you'll be in this fantasy world, and some people won't be able to know the difference between, okay, this is a fantasy world, and come back to like, alright, this is reality. So they'll use that to compare themselves, to compare what the real world should be. So in terms of romantic comedies, this theory suggests that people look to the media to see how relationships should be. So they'll see the relationship on the TV, and they'll compare it to their own relationship. Another theory I'd like to talk about is the cultivation theory that argues that with the media repeating themes and images over and over again, it'll eventually start to influence the person over time and how they see things. So it's really more specific to genre specific. You can, now that there's like a bunch of romantic comedies coming out more, so you can go watch it in the theaters. You can, if you like the movie, you can just buy it and watch it over and over and over again. And eventually what you think will start, what they're shown, the ideas shown on TV will start to be more, will start to kind of incorporate them with yourselves. So my hypothesis is the more a woman watches romantic comedies, the more it will impact her relationship or standards when searching for a partner. Methodology. 40 women from Marymount California University participated in the study. The age ranged from 18 to 39, with the mean being 21.43 and the standard deviation of 5.07. The ethnicity consisted of 25% Caucasian, 15% African American, 37% Hispanic, 10% Asian, and 3% other. Materials. My materials included a consent form, a survey, a debriefing form, a raffle ticket, and the software SPSF to analyze my data. My survey. I used the romantic belief scale proposed by Sprecher and Met. This scale is meant to analyze 4 different romantic ideals. These romantic ideals included love at first sight, finding the perfect other. Love at first sight, finding the perfect other, love conquers all, and soulmate. And at the end of the survey, I also was able to ask questions like, okay, what was your favorite genre, whether it be horror, action, romantic comedies? And one of the last questions I asked was a list of movies. Most of them were romantic comedies, and they were able to check off all the ones they had seen. And here's an example of my survey. As you can see, one of the questions that kind of goes with the idea of soulmate is, I believe that to be truly in love is to be in love forever. An example of love at first sight is when I find my true love, I will probably know it soon after we meet. An example of finding the perfect other will be the perfect person I love will make a perfect romantic partner. It will be completely accepting, loving, and understanding. My procedure. During a psychology fair that took place at Marymount California University, students and faculty were able to come up to my booth and volunteer to view my sample. Only women were able to take the sample, but once a volunteer came up to my booth, I gave them a brief script of what it was about, handed them a consent form, and once they signed it, I gave them a copy of the survey and a raffle ticket. My results. So what did I find? I found that women who watched romantic comedies had a strong correlation with the romantic idea of love conquers all. The p-value was 0.03. They also had a strong correlation with the romantic ideal one and only, with the p-value 0.041. I also found interesting that people who believed in love at first sight would also believe in finding the perfect other. And people who believed in love conquers all would believe in the romantic ideal one and only and finding the perfect other. Some of my limitations were I should have asked to see the average number of romantic comedies they watched. I should have tested more older people because when I was looking into my research, I found that the older a person was, the more experiences they would have, so they wouldn't be as influenced as the younger people would be. The younger people would look to the media to see, oh, okay, how should I behave? How should my relationship should be? So I wasn't able to see that. I also wasn't able to see how it affected their relationship, only if it affected them. So overall, my hypothesis was somewhat supported. Two out of four of the romantic ideals I tested for did have a correlation, but the other two didn't. In the future, there should be a larger sample, test more people, maybe have more diversity because different cultures have different point of views. So maybe right here in this region we believe in certain things, but if we go somewhere completely different, they might have a different interpretation of the films. And also I should have tested men and see how they reacted to these films. Maybe they wouldn't get it to see their relationships, but they would see it to see how they act, how they should be on dates. So I would also like to see that. I would also like to see how often they watch romantic comedies. I only gave a list of movies so they could have seen them throughout their life, and it wouldn't have had that much effect on them. But people who really do watch romantic comedies daily, maybe it would have had a more effect on them than others. So my take-home message is that romantic comedies do have an effect on women. Maybe not as much as I thought, but overall it does. So it's better to know, to be aware of what the media is putting out there and what ideas they're like giving us, just so we can be more careful when searching for a partner. Any questions?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming to my presentation today. My name is Dominique Marina, and the title of my capstone project is the Learn to Serve program. What does it really do? For a little background information, I've been working for the Learn to Serve program for about 4 years now. For the past year, I've served as the middleman between the Service Learning Department and the Boys and Girls Club. For those of you who do not know, students enroll in the Freshman ID 117 course. The students who enroll in the Freshman ID 117 course are required to participate in the Learn to Serve program. According to the program, all ID 117 students are required to complete a total of 24 hours in order to pass the class. The majority of students choose to donate their volunteer hours to the Boys and Girls Club. The Boys and Girls Club is a nonprofit organization that provides the neighborhood youth with a safe and structured environment where they can get involved after school. Generally, after-school programs offer children and adolescents a variety of extracurricular activities to participate in. For example, children have the opportunity to participate in sports to improve their physical health and art classes to develop their creativity. For my research question, I chose 2. How does the Learn to Serve program affect the Boys and Girls Club members and staff? And how do the Marymount California University volunteers assist the Boys and Girls Club members? Many studies have focused on the correlation between after-school programs and the activities that take place outside of the classroom. Studies explored the impact of after-school programs have on the development of a child. but few studies have focused on the impact the volunteers have on the after-school programs. This particular study examined how the quality of the child's after-school program experience affected the scholastic accomplishments and interactions with others. The researchers compared organized after-school programs to unstructured environments such as the local park or mall. Children who participated in the after-school program had higher levels of confidence and interpersonal skills. This study analyzed the relationship between how involved the child was after school and how well the child adjusted to their environment. The members of the after-school program engaged in academic and extracurricular activities. In unstructured situations, the children spent more time lounging around and watching TV. Why this topic? After school time is extremely important. If the child does not participate in semi-productive activities to occupy their time, they run the risk of becoming bored and choosing an alternative, dangerous path such as substance abuse. Children enrolled in an after-school program similar to the Boys and Girls Club are less likely to encounter these harmful situations. Unfortunately, many of the Boys and Girls Clubs in the area lack government funding and staff to serve the large amount of members enrolled. Luckily, each year, the Learn to Serve program has been able to provide the clubs with additional support from the Marymount California University volunteers to help assist the staff and members. I decided to examine 3 different hypotheses. First, I hypothesized that the MCU volunteers help reduce the Boys and Girls Club employee stress. Next, the present study aims to support the hypothesis that the MCU volunteers benefit the Boys and Girls Club members. Finally, I hypothesized that the MCU volunteers are available to provide help whenever necessary. There were 3 different groups of participants. The sample of Marymount California University volunteers consisted of 3 students. The sample of Boys and Girls Club staff consisted of 6 employees. The sample of Boys and Girls Club members consisted of 40 children. Altogether, there were a total of 49 participants. The Boys and Girls Club members were the only group that was compensated. My materials included a consent form with permission slips for the kids, 3 different surveys, a debriefing form, a Google document, and candy. And here are some examples of my survey questions. For the Boys and Girls Club members, I asked, are the Marymount California University volunteers there when you need them? For the Boys and Girls Club staff, I asked, do the Marymount California University volunteers provide help needed in your specific area? And for the Marymount California University volunteers, I asked, did you notice your buddy improving in certain areas? For my procedure, the participants were allowed unlimited time to complete each survey. Boys and Girls Club members were required to bring permission slips, signed permission slips and consent forms. After I received the parent permission slip and consent form, the members were given a short explanation, then handed the survey and asked if they had any questions. No more than 10 members were surveyed at one time. The survey took about 10 minutes to complete. After each member completed the survey and all materials were returned, they were thanked. Each participant was debriefed and compensated with candy. For the Boys and Girls Club staff, after I received a consent form, the staff members were surveyed individually. Before the survey was administered, I gave a brief description of the study's purpose. The survey took about 15 minutes to complete. After each employee completed the survey, all materials were collected and the participants were debriefed. And for the Marymount California University volunteers, a mass email was sent to all students that were enrolled in the ID 117 course during the fall 2013 semester. The email contained a brief description of the questions and link for the survey. The volunteers asked to take a few moments to complete the survey using Google Documents. All materials were collected electronically. For my results, the boys and girls, I'm going to start with the Boys and Girls Club staff. The employees were asked how often they worked with the volunteers, and 100% responded every day. When asked about the volunteers' availability, 100% responded always available. Employees were then asked if the Boys and Girls Club has a need for the MCU volunteers, and 100% responded yes. I also asked Boys and Girls Club employees several open-ended questions. When asked what specifically do the MCU volunteers help with, 5 out of 6 employees mentioned tutoring, 4 out of 6 employees listed playing games and running activities. Finally, the Boys and Girls Club employees were asked to list any criticisms or suggestions for the Learn to Serve program, and 5 out of 6 responded with none. For the Boys and Girls Club members, of the whole sample, 85% received help with their homework from the volunteers. The Boys and Girls Club members were asked whether they felt the volunteers were helpful, and 92.5% responded yes. Of the whole sample, 75% responded yes when asked whether the volunteers were available whenever they needed. First, I tested if the members believed the volunteers were helpful, and then I became interested in what areas the volunteers provided the most assistance. As I previously mentioned, 85% received homework help, 37.5% individually read with the volunteers, and finally, 37.5% of the sample interacted with the volunteers during the art program. And as for the Marymount California University volunteers, the volunteers were asked whether they noticed their specific buddies improving in certain areas, and 100% responded yes. Similar to the Boys and Girls Club staff members, I also asked the volunteers a few open-ended questions. When asked what is the volunteers' favorite activity to do with the members, 2 out of 3 of the sample responded sports, and 1 out of 3 of the sample responded with homework help. Some of my limitations included the lack of responses from the Marymount California University volunteers, and the lack of previous research regarding the impact volunteers have on after-school programs. The lack of responses from the MCU volunteers affected my results because I only received 3 surveys. For my conclusion, I conclude that the volunteers positively impact the Boys and Girls Club after-school program. The Marymount California University volunteers were accessible to the Boys and Girls Club staff, but not to the Boys and Girls Club members, as I originally proposed. Therefore, this data only partially supported my hypothesis. Additionally, the Boys and Girls Club members benefit by receiving extra adult interaction with the help interaction to help them on their homework, as well as numerous other activities. Overall, the majority of individuals involved in the Learn to Serve program benefit in some way, which partially supported my hypothesis. In the future, hopefully my study will contribute to the ongoing development and future success of the Learn to Serve program. I would also be interested to analyze how the Boys and Girls Club members affect the Marymount University volunteers. Thank you.
All of that inspiration and my passion led me to my question. How would a community garden be successful from a psychological and psychosocial standpoint on a college campus? With my question and my inspiration, I started digging deep into research about community gardens. The past research suggests being outside in a green space can improve well-being and relieve stress. People also used community gardens to build closer relationships, which would in turn reduce stress from that closeness. The research also showed that individuals use community gardens to strengthen those bonds, again, by reducing stress, and they also use the community gardens to be aware of their health. This all led me to my hypothesis. There are positive and psychological and psychosocial effects of working in a community garden that aid in stress management. This study will demonstrate that student participation in the community garden positively impacts student life. Now on to the fun stuff, my methodology. There were 51 students in total. 54% were female, 46% were male. We had 51% freshmen, 13.7% sophomores, 15.7% juniors, and 19.6% seniors. Students either volunteered at 38.8% or they came to the research and planting day as a class requirement, and that yielded 61.2%. On to my materials. I used a consent form and a procedure script where people at that point could ask questions. I had a pre-survey which included yes or no questions and Likert scale questions, meaning from 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest. I had pens and clipboards for participants, garden tools and supplies, a post-survey that also included yes or no questions, and another Likert scale from 1 to 5. There was a debriefing script explaining the study and contact information for myself and from the department head of psychology. Here are some sample questions that I designed. In the pre-survey, what is your stress level at this moment? That's what I asked students from 1 to 5. Do you feel working in a garden will reduce your stress today? And do you feel having a green, sustainable space on campus is beneficial to the MCU community? Some examples of my post-survey were, did you enjoy working in the garden today? I really wanted to know that. That was important to me. And how much do you feel working in the garden helped with your stress reduction today? Again, on a Likert scale from 1 to 5. Now moving on to the procedure. The procedure was done in one day at a scheduled planting day. Participants were given 2 consent forms, one for their own records and one for my records. I read from a procedure script where people had the chance to ask me questions. Then the pre-survey was given. There was no time limit, but it took students anywhere between 5 to 8 minutes. Then, after the survey was completed, students worked in the garden for up to 1 hour doing various garden tasks. These are some photos of the various garden tasks. They made seed balls. They helped with moving mulch around the garden site. They transferred and planted fruit trees. They planted seeds in our raised troughs. They also learned about composting and eventually helped with cleanup. After the 1 hour, participants then completed the post-survey. Again, there was no time limit, but it took students close to 5 minutes or so. Participants were then given a debriefing script, which explained the study, again with my contact information and the psychology department head's contact information. All the participants were heavily thanked because it was a wonderful day, and they received no compensation for participating in my study. So moving on to the results, the juicy part. Okay, the pre-survey, the question was asked, how did you enjoy working in the garden? There was a mean, this was again out of 5 on a Likert scale, and the mean yielded 3.9 with a standard deviation of 1.18. Another question was asked, do you feel growing your own food is beneficial? 96.1% of students said that it was, and this is even before they worked in the garden. Another question, if there were more academic instruction in the garden, would you attend? A higher percentage at 74%. And what is your stress level today? Out of 5, again a Likert scale, the mean was 2.4 with a standard deviation of 1.34. And the last question, do you feel that working in a garden will reduce your stress level today? And that yielded 70.6%. Okay. After working in the garden, let's move on to the post-survey results. So, I was extremely happy with these results. The first and one of the more important questions, as I said earlier, was, did you enjoy working in the garden today? A whopping 91.5% said that they did. Another question, do you feel working with others in a green space helped with collaboration skills, meaning that they work together to complete a task? A whopping 93.6% said that they did. Another question, how much do you feel that working in the garden helped with your stress reduction today? Out of 5, the mean was 3.9 with a standard deviation of 1.18. And the last question, which was actually pretty surprising to me, was, would you consider working in a garden to reduce your stress in the future? And 83% said that they would. That means that they want to come back to the garden and work. So to summarize, my hypothesis was supported. There are positive and psychological and psychosocial effects of working in a community garden, and that helps with stress management. Participation in the garden impacted the student life in a positive way on campus. There were high levels of satisfaction, and the mean of stress was higher than average. And lastly, students would use the garden to come back to reduce their stress. However, there were a couple limitations to my study. The first one is not asking about stress levels in the same way on the surveys. So plainly saying, I didn't ask the exact same question on the pre-survey as I did to the post-survey. So it was very difficult to test for that statistical significance. And if I could go back, I would definitely change that. And then ensuring that everyone took the post-survey. So 51 students recorded taking the survey, but only 47 took the post-survey. So maybe if I had to go back and do it again, maybe I could stand at the exit way to ensure that everyone that took the pre-survey would take the post. Implications to my study. The garden project is something that the students want. There were high percentages of satisfaction and enjoyment, and it implies that this is something that the students want on campus. And they felt that growing their own food is beneficial and ultimately could be very cost effective for students. And this absolutely opens the door and gateways for more research, and definitely opens the door for more programming and student involvement around the garden. So this is a picture of our research day. These are members from the Peace Center, myself, and members from the Office of Sustainability. Everyone worked in the garden on the planting day. So this is one of my favorite parts of my project, coming up with future research. One of the things that I thought, these are all ideas that came to me after doing all of this research and getting feedback from people and getting people excited about this project. So one of the things would be more specific research surrounding stress and anxiety and how the garden can help with that. Maybe using like a larger sample instead of just having MCU students, but have faculty, staff members, community members, make it a bigger project on a larger scale. And also create a stress index for students. That could be used as a tool directly on campus to help the counseling department, to help the psychology department, and it could open the doors to using research with other universities. Another idea would be do specific research on growing your own food for nutrition, health benefits, and cost efficiency. This could relate to the psychology department and the business department. And then also conduct more research on if more degree programs that involve sustainability and the environment need to be here on campus at MCU. And then also invite the surrounding community to be members in participatory research with MCU. One of the things that happened because of the garden is that we donated all of our produce to Harbor Interfaith, which is in San Pedro. So maybe we could do research about how much food we're bringing to the outside community, measuring the weight or measuring the harvest days. And then lastly, do more research on if the garden provides space for faculty members, staff, to conduct more activities, host really exciting speakers, and have bigger events. So this is a picture of the success of our garden. It has grown tenfold. And just the other day, we harvested all of that food. And even though I didn't take data on the day, everyone came up to me and said, "This really helped with my stress, with finals and capstones and things like that." So success and less stress is my message from the garden. But my real take-home message is people deal with stress in different ways. So make time for yourself to get out of an office or out of your house or away from the computer and go into a garden, go for a hike, go for a walk, because the studies do show that it reduces stress and increases a sense of mental well-being and belonging. And health is wealth, but mental health is also wealth. And if you're very lucky, if you go to a garden, there will also be strawberries. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
My name is Matthew Broderick, the one and only. My capstone is on bereavement education for educators. Grief happens in schools. So a little bit about how I got to the question, not just how I got to the capstone, but how I got to the question. In 1989, my dad passed away while I was in second grade, and I was in Catholic school, thankfully. So I did have priests and people to talk to, but it really threw my mom for a loop. With anybody would throw it for a loop. So I went to a sort of a group counseling session offered at another church for kids who had lost parents. So grief has played a part of my life since really 1987 when my grandfather passed away. So, but even more so when my dad passed away in 1989. So I attended counseling also at my school. It was really weird. It was a person who we've seen on campus, but we never talked to. We didn't know what they did. Obviously, as a second grader, you definitely don't know what they do. But we got pulled out, and it was sort of like the dentist office, where we got little treats and toys afterwards, and little Clifford erasers. So I grew up. I did the counseling for about 2 years, on and off. The cookies were the best thing, really, about counseling that I remember, at least. And then I became, student after many years after high school. And I actually started volunteering at a camp. Comfort Zone camps that I worked with my brother. It's actually a bereavement camp. If you don't know me, camping is sort of big for me. And not for my brother. So if he wanted to do it, we had a real conversation about our grief journey because we've never really talked about it. This is now 2009 maybe. So this is quite a couple years, obviously decades after the death that I experienced. And then I had an idea. And I go, let's combine the two. I'm already interested in it. So let's make it a project. What if I could have talked, this is the question I asked myself, what if I could have talked to my teacher instead of this counselor that I had never met, couldn't tell you her name now. She was actually in the convent at the time, so she might have been a nun, or that just might have been her office. But were they really ready for me? And I was like, aha, there's a research paper in this. You could do your capstone on this via Emma. So I thought, what could I measure? You guys can sit down. What can I measure? Because you have to measure something for it to be a research project. So I came up with a couple of hypotheses. Do teachers have education background training to handle grief during their formal education and through their certificate process? I don't know, I'm not a teacher, so let's find out. Then I went to, do students actually approach their teachers? Is that something that people do? Is that just me? Is that because my mother was so distraught that I went and sought outside help? Because in second grade, school is a huge part of your life. It's most of your day is at school. And in Catholic school, I would spend the next 7 years with the same students, continuing all the way through until I got to 9th grade. Couldn't there be a class? We teach a lot of things in school that not necessarily you're going to be tested on. So why can't we teach this? Eventually it's going to happen to us all. So why not teach it? Sort of my thoughts is that teachers really are on the front line. Whether it's middle school all the way up or middle school all the way down, they are on the front line. They are adults outside the family that students do connect to. And it is something that we're going to have to deal with. And I thought that students really needed more than just, a day away for the funeral or a day away that it happened. So, we've all heard about grief. Maybe. We've all experienced grief or will sometimes. The major person and player in this, yeah, it's a woman, is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She sort of came out with what is generally accepted as the theory that is going, is that grief is a cycle. It goes in with that denial at first. This isn't happening to me. This is happening to someone else. Goes into anger. Anger, a lot of time, where it's the younger people get stuck in. Either anger or depression. Angry, why is this happening? And then depression, they get stuck in it. I'm here. No one knows how I feel. This has only happened to me. They really feel isolated. Bargaining's more of I would say you are dying, not you've experienced the loss. Bargaining is I'll do anything. I'll go to church on Sunday if I can live through Friday night. And then finally, hopefully, we get to acceptance. But this is a circle, even though it doesn't look like it's a spiral, but people will continue and continue to get because they're not getting into acceptance. And acceptance doesn't mean that it's a full cure. The best example I've ever been given is grief is sort of like a hand in your face. The hand starts off when it's really, you can't see anything beyond it, and eventually it becomes just a hand in the back of the room, a hand down the hall. But it's always there, and you can rejoin into this circle every time you experience another loss. So every time someone dies, you're going to experience that grief cycle again to a smaller degree for everybody that you have lost. So I want to see sort of bridging the gap between what's out there and what I'd like to provide, and really what information can I gather for my research. So out there is a friend's place, and this sort of represents a lot of like what I did. Mine was called a Rainbow Connection, which is that group counseling on the weeknights. A lot of resources as far as bereavement networks that sort of go out there and publish and publish and publish, and are really hands-on. And just to show you the age when it can definitely happen, the kid's book about it. So there is publication out there that's not just scholarly, but it's actually an animated tale trying to tell them it's more than this is how we poop or we all poop. It is actually a dinosaur book about death. On the academic side, there's tons and tons of research on grief, a lot on childhood grief, but really I noticed that there was not a lot about an educational program in schools to talk about grief and coping. The coping skills is not just grief, it's about loss. Lost a job later on, you didn't do great on your test, your friend moved away. It's really dealing with stress. Coping skills is a deal with stress, but my focus is on grief. But there was lack of studies that dealt with schools. There was one in the UK, I don't know how it went because they got funded, they went and did it, and they didn't report on it. So it was great as far as what I could see about their curriculum, but they didn't follow up. They didn't release another research paper that says, look at how great this is. So there was definitely a lack for me to find specifically what I was asking for was, what do teachers have? Do they approach the teachers? And is there a need really for a program that's in schools? So I need to go ahead and give you my hypothesis. It's easy. And is that there's little to no classroom education for teachers in their formal education and in their certification. And that I do think that teachers do have to deal with loss and grief in the classroom. And finally, that there should be a module added into schools, American schools, that deal with grief, loss, and coping skills. So my participants. I did not get to go ahead and stand around and get student input, because I was targeting teachers. Teachers are busy people. So I did go to Facebook actually, and went into a lot of different teachers' unions, and put it out there on Facebook. My form, as you will see, was on a Google Doc, so it's not something I need to go ahead and be in person. It's something they can do online at their desk. So I went to UTLA. I did survey teachers, educators here on campus as well. But this was these two were the huge ones. The teachers' unions were really great. I have friends that are teachers here at POLA and at Bishop Montgomery. So most of my participants, 46, were female teachers. Large majority of that was primary and secondary education. Also, I decided to really see what kind of schools they teach at. I had one that was a private school with religious affiliation, so we did see a lot of that. That's 32, so Marymount would be considered a private school with religious association. We got 13 teachers out of the 67 that I surveyed, coming from public, and 14 more coming from public charter, which would be probably POLA. As far as the breakdown where they taught, it's pretty semi-even, secondary, post-secondary, and then in primary schools, which for me was kindergarten through 5th grade. So my materials, like I said, that was my link I sent to them. It was this Google Doc that they get to go ahead and click through, and also give their feedback in a narrative for explaining why, if they wanted to, why they chose what they chose. So there's about, there was 27 questions on my survey. It was pretty straightforward, and it did target them directly. Have you ever completed a college level course that specifically dealt with bereavement? Most people in this one would say that they took a death and dying or a lifespan psychology class as an elective, but nothing that was required. Has your student ever experienced a loss? To see really, is it not that big of is it not an epidemic? And have you ever been talked to about a loss? So my procedures, I did go ahead and link it to teachers at different pages, send it out via email, obviously, to the Marymount educators. Oh, I lied. 24 questions, not 27. And at the completion, I did thank them and told them what the goal of it really was. So I did get some feedback from teachers via email in support. I got like 4 that said, this would be great, I'd love this at my school. Someone from Mississippi said, you should send this to us, we would love to go ahead and follow through, or at least follow up with you on how it went. So the results. 33% responded that they had taken a course about grief. 11% said it was a specific course to deal with grief, that's with the death and dying and lifespan. And 23 sort of said it was a general psych course that they overviewed grief and coping skills. 7% did receive on-the-job training, so that's only 7% of the educators that responded said that their institution ever told them how to deal with it. I would say that the 7%, most of the deal with it was an insurance sort of, make sure we're okay with our insurance. You need to make sure that they go see a mental health professional. And that's at 82%, that they did have a mental health professional on site, whether it's part-time, full-time, they had some sort of counselor. 88% of the teachers said that the student had experienced a loss while they're in the class. So that's a huge, 88% has experienced a loss. And it did go up as we went into high school. People are getting older in high school. Their grandparents are getting older. Alternative lifestyles, whether it's gangs, it's going to be a violence-oriented thing. So there's a lot of this percent was from high schools. And colleges, same thing. 55% of the educators did say that they were approached after the loss. So we're seeing 7% are told about what to do about the students, but only 55% are actually approached. 85% of the teachers felt there was a need for a bereavement and coping skills module added for the students and for themselves. So there's a need. 19% said it could actually stand alone as its own class in high school, that they could offer this class in high school. Sorry. Elementary school, I asked them where this module should be placed, where this class could be. We saw the highest percentage in high school and junior high. Elementary, a little bit about grief, kids sort of recognize what grief is by about 6. They know what it is, they sort of get it. By 8, they can fully accept that it is a long-term thing. So that's why you see the 14%. Junior high and high school, most of them thought that this had a great place in sex ed. It's a class you already teach, or a health class. You teach it in 6th grade, you teach it again in 9th grade. They said you bring in health professionals already, whether it's nurses, doctors, or someone who's in the industry, to talk about it. Why not bring a psych person in to then go ahead and talk about coping skills? That was a great suggestion. So my hypotheses were supported. Educators received little to no coursework during their formal education and certification, and there's really hardly any on-the-job training that was more than a pamphlet or something mentioned in a handbook that I'm sure they all read. So my other hypothesis supported. Most teachers, that 88% we saw, have had a loss happen while a student was enrolled in their class. And that 55% were approached about that loss. That's quite a bit. So teachers really are on the front line. They're going to get talked to it. Now, whether this is, hey, my assignment might be late, or hey, I really need to break down, I need to talk to someone that's not grieving themselves. Sometimes they just need to connect with something that is stable outside the home, because the home is unstable. A majority of teachers thought there was a need for this course or module regarding grief and coping. That was huge. That's really the end result of the research project itself, is to go ahead and form that module. So some of my limitations, my sample size was 67. A lot of that was private schools with religious associations, so that also might have skewed the percentage that had on-site counseling. When you go into more rural areas, places that are metropolitans, you're going to see that they're going to have one for the district versus one that's full-time. They're going to have an emergency response team that'll come in during crisis. And that crisis isn't that I lost my dad, that crisis is there was a shooting at the school. So no one's going to be there other than a teacher or maybe their guidance counselor who's really just there to talk about their classes to really help them. And there's really a lack, because that UK school, of what I was talking about. There's lack of some topics that I couldn't base mine off of. There's no baseline for me. It was really just going off of my 4 hypotheses. So some implications. Are we teaching to the test? So in high schools, in junior highs, we're teaching to an exit exam, we're teaching to an SAT. But are we teaching students really how to be better human beings, how to be fully functioning, how to be able to cope with whatever life throws at them? If you're teaching me to a test as a high schooler, and I choose to be a plumber, because I'm probably going to make more, I'm never going to go for that. That test means nothing to me. All you've taught me is stuff I'm not going to use. Why not teach then instead something everyone's going to have to use? You taught me about human sexuality and hygiene, and we got rid of the cooking already. Why not teach me something that's not going to be tested, but something I'm going to use every day? So we could look at this. Are we teaching really the right way? Are we teaching to get into college, or are we teaching people to be good, better, well-rounded people? There's a need for additional training, whether it is a seminar or during an orientation week, what to do about this subject when students come up to you. There needs to be something, even if it's a pamphlet that's a little bit more in depth, or it's a page of links that says, here, do this, or something online that they can get their continuing education credit for. This can be rolled in to a teacher's repertoire already. Teachers are already bogged down. A lot of the people that did get surveyed said there's enough classes, that the students have enough to do, that they had enough to do. It was hard enough for them to get what they had to do. So I disagree with the 19. It doesn't need to be a separate class. It could be just rolled into something else. So some future research ideas. I'd like to see a curriculum be developed sort of US-centered, because that UK one was great. Some of it did have religious affiliation, which is definitely a confound. When we talk about grief and loss, how are you going to keep separation of church and state? You can't say that mommy and daddy are in heaven, because what if Timmy doesn't believe in that? So you really have to teach more on the coping skills. So a non-denominational, non-religious at all curriculum should be developed so to go into public schools as well. I'd love to see a pilot program, whether that's myself or somebody else, to go ahead and put this into a school that wants to give it a chance, whether it's just a week module, a couple day module that's in a 6th or 9th grade health class about grief, loss, death, dying. Way back when I thought my capstone was actually going to be completely different, I did an internship with Rolling Hills Prep, and I taught some of this, not directed towards grief, but directed towards coping skills. And we really identified the negative coping skills that are going on, the drug use, the oversleeping, the alcohol use that they did, and tried to talk about replacing it instead with positive coping skills, like going outside, playing video games in moderation, writing, journaling, drawing. So there's a need for it on the student basis, as I found, is that a lot of them were doing unhealthy coping skills. These were 9th, 10th, 11th graders that I did it with. So this is the target audience, really, to teach them about what they can do about stress. Otherwise, we're having people blow up or have total breakdowns come finals times, come big test that they're teaching to. So that just the coping skills alone to deal with life is something I think we think is taught at home, but if the parents were never taught it, how do the kids know it? And instead of copying, making a ditto of their parents, let's try to improve on each copy or revision. So your take home is loss is natural and expected part of life. Before reaching adulthood, the majority of children and adolescents will experience the loss of a close or special person. Therefore, it is very important for educators and staff at all levels to have a strong understanding of the ways in which they can support